Hi, this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. It's Thursday, July the 4th, 2019. When I was a kid, I used to get a lot of complaints from people who didn't like to argue with me. They would say, especially my parents. My parents would constantly tell me, well, the problem with arguing with you is that you lay down these kind of final moments. I forget what they'd call them. Just, what I would say was so final, right? And, yeah, I do. When I make an argument, there's sometimes that I insist, and you don't have to argue with me, right? But I insist that if you want to have the argument, that we have to accept certain points. So, like, what I'm talking about this morning is healthcare. And what I said here is that months to see a doctor, denied prescriptions, bad diagnosis, and that's just my personal experience. I also host, I'll have to correct that, 2 groups where I see all kinds of abuse, especially financial. Basically, we're racing towards Medicare for all, except the Medicare and Medicaid systems are both corrupt cash cows for the private healthcare system. It's like running headlong into a noose. Every time you think you're making progress, you're really hanging yourself. And what I'm talking about there is, I forget her name, Loretta Lynch. When she was the top police law enforcement or whatever, she prosecuted basically $1 billion a year in just people like doctors and hospitals and stuff ripping off Medicare and Medicaid. And that's estimated to be, I think, 10% of the actual crime that's going on. So the Medicaid, Medicare systems are already set up so that the rich can steal piles and piles of money through the Medicare Medicaid system. So as much as we can brag about the Medicare Medicaid system, because it is a system where you can actually go see a doctor, right? Okay, but at the same time, when we talk about overhead and stuff and we brag about it, we're not taking into account the fact that I don't know how much of that money that's going in is not actually going to patient care. It's going to paying doctors and the healthcare system, and to a lesser extent all the people who help, like nurses and the farther, right down to janitors, right? And I doubt they get paid that much, so they don't really, and that's not where, well, as far as I know, the corruption is taking place. But it might be that they managed to skim off of their salaries or something. Who knows? I did get honors in accounting, and I can tell you that there's all kinds of ways that they can figure it before it ever even gets into the system, right? And then, of course, it becomes administrative costs or something. Who knows? So, yeah, in this debate, like, I think we should move to Medicare, Medicaid, but then for all. But I think once we get there, we're going to have the fight to reform that system to take it away from the rich. Because it's the rich. It's always the rich. I mean, I'm not saying every rich person is like, well, maybe I am. Maybe they all are. Just like I'm evil because my country killed 1 million people in Iraq. You know, I can't escape that. I'm responsible for it. I do everything I can to change the system so we don't do things like that again. I'm doing everything I can to get the rich out of the political and economic systems so that we can have a system that isn't evil anymore. Right? Assuming that we can run it without being evil. That we don't step into the same greedy traps as they stepped into, right? We have to do that, otherwise we'll actually be the ones committing the crimes, right? At least in this case, not only are people like me not committing the crimes, but we're not supporting them morally. We're forced to support them financially, right? Our taxes for the 30, 40 years that I worked, or for the 30 or 35 years that I actually paid taxes before I retired. I was forced. So, in that respect, I'm not as culpable as, say, my dad, who supported all, everything. My dad supported the Patriot Act. He used to say, well, I don't have anything to hide, so I don't care if they want to videotape me and record my phone calls. It's just to stop terrorists. Bullshit. It's to stop people from stealing from rent-to-own stores. It is. I mean, it's everybody acts like we're trying to fight terrorism, but what we're really trying to fight is petty crime. Because that's the ultimate expression of terrorism in this country, when somebody tries to walk out of a Walmart with speakers in their pants. It is. I mean, woo, 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 woo. Get the National Guard out, Drag them to the ground, throw them in jail. But it is, and I've talked about this before. Criminality in this country is the ultimate form of protest. And I'm not talking about walking into somebody's house and shooting them. I'm talking about stealing, doing drugs. It's all the ultimate form of protest. I know it's not organized and on the street with signs where everybody, you're not trying to attract a lot of attention, but you're definitely trying to buck the system, right? And if you get away with it, you are bucking the system, and most crime people do get away with it. I think. At least 50%. Anyway, so what is my point? Well, I know what my point is, but I've gotten far away from it. So I'm not going to try and go backwards. I'll just go straight back to this. So I was arguing about arguing, and I agree. I mean, the real point of debate is not to win, but to win because you're good, right? To win because you're good, because you're on the side of good, and you're arguing for good, and you actually lay it out and show people why it's good. So, I'm not going to argue why healthcare is good. Everybody knows that. I mean, obviously, if somebody's, I mean, we feel sorry for everything, right? So obviously, a human being suffering, we ought to do what we can to help them. Once they're back up on their feet and they can work and stuff, then they'll pay us back. But for those of us who hit that any kind of bump in the road, we ought to be there for each other. If we're not going to do that, we might as well just, have a huge steel death cage match, winner takes all, right? No, I'm joking. Of course we don't want to do that. That's the whole point. So, arguing, yes. You do have to insist at the beginning of every argument that we accept certain realities. So, when I argue with people about healthcare, I argue the reality, that, yeah, you do have to feel sorry for and, we have to work together and all that kind of stuff, like I was just talking about. Otherwise it just turns into one big piece of shit. Because to me, one American suffering and just ignored turns the whole country into a piece of shit. To me, I'm a piece of shit for allowing it. So, of course I am, I'm a loser. I can't seem to get the rest of the country to come around and finally do something about it. And I gotta tell you, when I was 5 years old, I can remember walking down the sidewalk in San Jose, California. I remember, I think I was 5 or 6, because probably six or 7 when Robert Kennedy died. And I had learned everything already about poverty and despair and everything. I'd been watching the news, I guess, So one way or another, I learned. And, after that, I always kept looking, because I'd see clips of John F. Kennedy talking about ending poverty in this country, and I was like, well, it looks like America's getting ready to do this, to end this. You'd see commercials on TV about little kids in Appalachia who were starving. I live in Appalachia now, right next to it. I'm in central Kentucky. And constantly, I was like, well, we're going to do this. It just seemed like we were going to do this. Yeah, it's our media. It's the rich. The rich are constantly trying to convince us that their system, their wonderful capitalist system, that them and their wonderful capitalist system is actually going to solve this problem, when it was never their intention to do so in the first place. Because, well, I've covered that ad nauseum, so I'm not going to cover it here, but they never intended to. And they still don't. They're just dragging it out as long as they can. So, of course, over the years, I just kept like, oh, now we've got Jimmy Carter, we're gonna do it. Now we've got the Clintons, we're gonna do it. We're gonna solve the problems. Oh, how did we end up with this dipshit Bush? And that was probably politically the most depressing 8 years of my life. People, they threw me in jail for saying that people make me feel like I want to kill them. Well, you can't imagine how much I felt like I wanted to kill, the neocons. If I could have just wished them off the face of the earth, I probably would have. But as we all know, that's just talk. I don't want to kill anybody, but it doesn't change the way you feel. It doesn't change the fact that you feel like they're evil. They create hell on earth, horror, torture, murder, mass murder, genocide. Of course you feel like it would be just. You feel like if there were a real court in the world and they would just take those people and hang them, right? So, and then Obama comes along, and I'm like, okay, this is it, a black man. Well, the first thing I find out is he's not actually black. He's whiter than I am, right? I mean, he's not, but his mother was whiter than my mother. And then I find out he's droning the shit out of people, and he keeps on pushing off our withdrawal from Iraq and our withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think he finally withdrew all but 5,000 troops from Iraq just before he left office. Something he was supposed to do in 2011, 2013, right? And again, he was droning people, he was bombing people. We continue to bomb everybody. I'm like, am I going to get to see this dream of mine of ending poverty and despair in my country before I die or not? Maybe not, but I would at least like to see that we're headed firmly in that direction before I die. Is that too much to ask of America? I mean, just give people the basics, health care, a roof over their head, whatever they need to live a life of dignity, whether it's running water, toilets, a decent suit so they can go to a interview or whatever, an education so that they can qualify for, training, whatever kind of training. It's just disgusting, man. I mean, you lose your job and everybody tells you gotta go get a job, but do they find you a job? Do they train you for that job? Do they put you out there and put you to work? No. They just tell you to look for a job, and 90% of the stuff, I mean, even the stuff that I actually sent my resume out for, 90% of it was stuff I didn't know how to do. Fuck, every human being's the same. Just tell them, come here, we'll train you how to do this. We'll make sure that your job's not a beast, and we'll take care of you. As long as you're willing to participate in the creation of wealth, we will reward you with, your percentage of that wealth minus what it takes to reinvest, or whatever, costs, whatever. These are arguments that are just like what my parents used to complain about. They're just boom, You don't argue them. You argue how to do them. You don't argue whether or not to do them. I mean, there's no doubt that the system is designed simply to keep people stupid, to keep people poor, and to keep people under the thumb of the few people who are running the system, the rich. The rich and their, thugs and goons and whatever. So, as far as this goes about healthcare, my argument is simple, and that's that we better watch out. Just because we get Medicare for all, and that's a big if, right? But just because we get it doesn't mean that it's like some kind of utopian system. In fact, I'm making the supposition here that it is actually completely corrupt for the rich, owned by the rich, completely privatized. All that the Medicare and Medicaid system does is arrange for the payment, for the money to move from the taxpayer's pocket, which mostly is us. The rich, the taxes they pay are inconsequential to them anyway. I mean, if you have $100 million, it doesn't hurt you that you paid $1 million in taxes that year. You could do that for 100 years and you wouldn't go broke until the last year. The person who pays the taxes is the guy like me, get $500 every 2 weeks. This is when, in 1991, when I first moved to Kentucky for this job that I had for 22 years, and you get paid $500 every 2 weeks working your ass off, and what happens? They take $250 of it. I mean, between all the state, federal, and local stuff, they took nearly half. I mean, it would be like $210, $220 every 2 weeks out of $500. How are you even supposed to pay your fucking rent, man? I mean, it was a joke. And I finally told, because I was working for my parents, I finally told them, first of all, Mom and Dad, you're breaking the labor law, you're breaking the minimum wage law. If you get them to work, just because it's called salary doesn't mean that you can't. Okay, so I got them to change it very quickly. And I started making, 23,000 a year after I got them to change it, and slowly worked my way up. At times I was making like 45, 47 was where I topped out. So, anyway, so my point here is that the healthcare, Medicare and Medicaid is just designed to move the money from, I was talking about taxpayers, but as a taxpayer, how screwed you are the less money you make, right? But, I mean, I was paying nearly 50% in taxes. My God. And I was at the very bottom. So they're the ones paying the taxes, really. Don't let these rich people confuse you and make you believe that they're paying. Yes, they may pay 50% of the total that's going in, the total revenue. I don't know the exact number. And my guess is that's fudged, that number. I heard that number once. But what they're doing is they're moving money out of the pockets of desperate people, really, into the healthcare system through Medicare and Medicaid. And then on top of that, it's all corrupt. So most of the money isn't actually going to people's healthcare. It's going into the pockets of rich people who do nothing for it. Nothing. They absolutely do nothing. They're the investors, they're the stockholders, etc. And that's a fact that I'm going to insist people accept. Prove me wrong. Get all the statistics, get all the numbers from, what's spent and how it's spent and where it goes, and prove me wrong. Nah, you won't be able to do that, because they won't even let you look at those numbers. I mean, I had a hell of a time just getting my dentist to give me a printout of what they were charging my Medicare. Can you imagine? You can't even, because you're not officially the person paying the bill, even though you certainly are morally, right? I mean, you worked all your life, and now you're qualified for Obamacare because you got no money even though you worked all your life. So in a way, you paid. So in a way, you're paying every time you go to the doctor or dentist. Why shouldn't you be able to get a list from your doctor of your medical bills? You know, how much did Medicare, Medicaid pay my dentist or my doctor? And it took them a little while. They finally gave me it's not like they could really say no. But I'll tell you what, go to Medicare or Medicaid, like go to Medicaid of Kentucky, if you're in Kentucky, or go to your state Medicaid and demand, an accounting of what's going on because of your appointments. What money is being charged and where is it going, right? You'll find it very difficult to get that information. You might have to file a Freedom of Information Act just to get it. You know, with everything else that I do, it's amazing I even have time to cover subjects like this, but I did make I did make a group a long time ago, and I still like it. Americans Against Medical Abuse and Fraud. And I suggest you go there, check out the posts. Probably all by me, because there aren't a lot of people in this group. Definitely go check them out. Americans for Single Payer. There's other people active in here. And you know what? Don't be afraid to lay down the law when it comes to arguing with people. I insist. Otherwise, I won't argue with them. I insist that we accept certain, it's kind of parameters for the whole debate, right? Because if you don't, then how do you have the debate? I mean, how are you going to debate somebody about health care if they won't accept as a premise of the debate that a person has a right to human dignity? That when they become injured or they get sick, that as a fellow American or as a fellow human being, it just depends on how big of an umbrella you want to open, right? That they have a right to expect other people around them to care, and that care should extend to actually trying to help them. How do you have a debate about healthcare without accepting that premise? And there are conservatives who will not accept that premise, and I say, fuck them, right? Don't argue with them. Just say to them, look, if you're that boneheaded, I'm not going to have this discussion. Come back one of these days and we'll have the discussion when you're willing to show that you at least have a little bit of empathy for people. Until then, you're just too much of a bonehead. Right? I mean, I think that's the only thing you can do with people like that. Anyway, so this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. Hope you enjoyed my segment.